Have you ever imagined becoming the kind of person who moves through life untouched by rejection, betrayal, or criticism? Have you ever silently longed for the day when that invisible weight you carry, the sorrow you conceal behind your smile, finally lifts? That aching void, that unspoken exhaustion from constantly appearing strong, from never allowing yourself to rest, even for a single moment. You're not alone. Maybe you've grown tired of trying to be everything for everyone, of keeping up an image that demands constant emotional resilience. Outwardly, you may appear confident, stable, even invincible. But inside, there's a quiet storm, a longing to let go, to breathe, to simply stop pretending. But let me share a truth that most people never dare to say out loud. As long as you try to avoid pain, pain will rule you. As long as you keep hiding, numbing, distracting yourself just to get by, you'll remain a prisoner, not to other people's actions, but to your own reaction to them. Pain isn't always a sign of weakness. In fact, it's often the clearest signal that you are still alive, still human. The real issue isn't that you hurt, it's that you don't understand where the hurt truly comes from, and because of that, it controls you. It owns your reactions, your decisions, your emotional highs and lows. Carl Jung, a pioneer of modern depth psychology, once said, "We are not what happened to us, but what we choose to become." This is where the path to emotional liberation begins, not by building walls around your heart, not by trying to be untouchable, but by learning how to bring the hidden parts of yourself into the light. The world will continue to throw challenges your way. People will disappoint you, words will sting, silence will feel like abandonment, but none of those things can truly harm you unless they find something inside you that is already hurting. Something unresolved, something fragile. The world doesn't create your pain, it reveals it. What truly wounds you is not what people do. It's the internal narrative those actions awaken. It's the old wounds you never dared to face. It's the feelings you buried beneath layers of pride, perfectionism, and the relentless pursuit of appearing okay. This is not a flaw. This is the common reality for almost everyone. The only difference is that some people have learned to wear their masks better. And here's another uncomfortable truth. You suffer not just because others hurt you, but because somewhere inside you still believe you can control how the world treats you. You still think, if I'm kind enough, wise enough, strong enough, maybe they won't abandon me. Maybe I won't be betrayed. Maybe they'll see my worth. But control is a seductive lie. It offers the illusion of safety while chaining you to anxiety and fear. It keeps you locked in a cycle of overthinking, overcompensating, and never fully living. So how do you begin to heal? By releasing the need to control and embracing a deeper awareness of yourself, as long as you believe that others need to change. For your suffering to end, you remain at the mercy of their actions. Real emotional freedom begins the moment you realize what comes from the outside only has power if it echoes something unresolved inside you, and that echo lives in a place most of us fear to explore, the unconscious. It's the unseen territory. Within you, the stories you didn't finish writing, the wounds you never allowed to close, the memories you locked away because they were too painful to revisit. This is where the true battlefield lies, not in the world outside, but in the unseen scripts that drive your reactions. Jung was clear. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. The pain that seems to come out of nowhere, the anger that flares without warning, the sadness that drapes itself over you on an otherwise good day, all of it has meaning. None of it is random. These are signals, alarms going off in places you've ignored for too long, not to punish you, but to call you back to yourself. The unconscious is not some distant fog of thoughts. It's an active, living part of your psyche. It's filled with emotions, memories, and desires you have disowned. But ignoring them doesn't make them vanish. It just gives them power over you in hidden, often destructive ways. You wonder why a simple comment can ruin your day, while others seem unaffected. It's not about the comment. It's about where it lands inside you. Does it strike an old wound, a fear, a memory? If so, it will bleed. And here's what makes it worse. Instead of facing these wounds, most people repress them. We hide behind busyness, behind performance, behind rationality. We say, it's not a big deal, even when it's tearing us apart. We dismiss our pain, thinking silence equals strength. But Jung said, we cannot change anything unless we accept it. Judging yourself won't heal you. Pretending you're okay won't make the hurt go away. Ignoring your wounds only forces them to express themselves in darker ways, through toxic relationships, recurring anxiety, or unexplained emotional spirals. So if you truly want to stop being hurt, you must stop running from what's within you. The more you try to shield yourself from the world, the more vulnerable you become. Because the real danger isn't what people do to you. It's what you refuse to see in yourself. But there's another way, and it's not through resistance. It's through integration. Becoming emotionally resilient isn't about building armor. It's not about pretending nothing affects you. It's about knowing yourself so deeply, so honestly, that nothing outside can touch what has already been accepted inside. This isn't easy. It requires courage. Not the kind of courage that wins battles or impresses people, but the kind that sits quietly in front of your pain and says, I'm ready to listen. In the next part, we'll explore how integration works. We'll dive deeper into Jung's concept of individuation, the journey of becoming whole, not perfect. The journey of turning your pain into power, not by resisting it, but by understanding it. Because emotional immunity doesn't come from pretending, it comes from presence. Most people think the only way to protect themselves from pain is by becoming numb to it. They learn to put up walls, wear emotional armor, and pretend that nothing gets to them. I don't care anymore, they say. Nothing affects me. But deep down, they're still bleeding. They're still corroding inside, because the real problem isn't pain. It's the lack of clarity about where that pain is coming from. The real danger lies in not knowing what you're feeling and why. And this confusion doesn't come from weakness. It comes from disconnection, from being out of touch with your inner world. Jung understood this intimately. He once said, know all the theories, master all the techniques, but as you touch a human soul, be just another human soul. And that human soul he spoke of, that tender, often trembling essence, you've been hiding it, behind strength, behind self-control, behind the illusion of having it all together. But that part of you, the one you buried because it felt too vulnerable, isn't your weakness. It's the doorway to your true strength. Emotional resilience isn't about becoming cold. It's not about rejecting your feelings or walking away from conflict without a second thought. It's about doing something far more courageous, integrating the parts of yourself you've been taught to hide. To integrate means to stop dividing yourself into acceptable and unacceptable pieces. It means welcoming your fear, your shame, your insecurity, your rage, not to indulge in them, but to understand them. To bring them into the light so they no longer control you from the dark. Because here's the truth, nothing from the outside can truly destroy you once everything inside of you has been embraced. You stop being reactive when you stop being ashamed of who you are. You become untouchable not because you are invulnerable, but because you no longer abandon yourself when pain arises. You no longer collapse under judgment. You no longer flee your own depths. Jung called this process individuation, the path of becoming who you were always meant to be, beneath the roles, the labels, and the coping mechanisms. Individuation isn't about becoming perfect. It's about becoming whole. It's the meeting point between the conscious self and the unconscious self, the union of light and shadow. And here's the part most people miss. Your shadow isn't evil. It's not some monstrous thing to be banished. Your shadow is made of everything you've disowned to fit in, everything you push down to be loved, everything you silence to avoid rejection, your anger. Maybe it was never welcomed, your sensitivity. Maybe it was ridiculed, your sadness. Maybe no one had time for it. So you learned to cut off parts of yourself to survive. But surviving is not the same as living, and individuation is the call to go beyond survival. It's the invitation to retrieve those lost pieces, to bring them home. Not to act on them blindly, but to hold them consciously, compassionately. Because what you repress doesn't disappear. It becomes the ghost that haunts your choices, the silent force behind self-sabotage, the reason you overreact or shut down. Until you face it, that's when real transformation begins. And here's a secret no one tells you. When you finally turn toward your shadow, you realize it's not your enemy. It's the part of you that has waited the longest to be seen. It holds your creative fire, your intuition, your rawness, your buried power. You don't heal by cutting it off. You heal by listening to what it's been trying to say all along. And once you do that, once you integrate, you're no longer a puppet of your emotions. You become the one holding the strings. You act instead of react. You choose instead of collapse. You remain rooted even when the storm hits. This doesn't mean you'll never feel pain again. It means pain will no longer define you. It may still pass through you, but it won't unravel you. That's what it means to be untouchable. It's not about becoming harder. It's about becoming deeper. And that depth will cost you. Because when you start to dive below the surface, you begin to outgrow the masks you once wore. You start to see through the illusions that once comforted you. You stop needing to be liked by everyone. You stop needing to win every argument. You stop needing to be the strong one all the time. Why? Because you've discovered something far more powerful than performance, self-knowledge. You've looked your demons in the eyes. You've said to your fear, I see you. To your shame, you don't own me. To your rage, I will not bury you. I will listen to you. And that level of honesty creates an internal clarity that nothing external can break. The real emotional armor isn't made of stone, it's made of awareness, and it forms not around you, but within you. It's the solid ground you stand on when everything around you feels like it's falling apart. You might still feel grief, still feel anger, still feel fear, but none of those things uproot you anymore, because your roots are in your truth. This is the heart of individuation. It's not about becoming more perfect, more lovable, more impressive. It's about becoming more you, raw, whole, unedited. Not the version of you that performs for validation, but the version that simply exists in its own right, with nothing to prove and nothing to hide. This is the journey most people will never take, because it's hard, because it's lonely, because at first it feels like a kind of death, and in a way, it is. To individuate, you must let parts of yourself die, the old beliefs, the compulsive roles, the false identities. You must allow what no longer serves you to dissolve, and that can feel terrifying. But here's the paradox. It's only when everything false falls away that your true self begins to emerge. And when it does, you realize, maybe for the first time, that you don't need the world to validate you. You don't need the noise, the applause, the approval. You're already enough. You're already whole. That's the quiet power of someone who's done the work. That's what makes you untouchable. And yes, it's lonely sometimes. Not because you're alone, but because few are willing to follow you into those depths. Most people are still living on the surface, still chasing illusions, still clinging to their masks. And so you may find yourself distancing from certain people, from certain environments, but that distance isn't arrogance, it's evolution. You're not pulling away because you think you're better. You're pulling away because you're no longer willing to shrink yourself to stay where you no longer belong. And with that clarity comes a new kind of strength. Not the strength of control, but the strength of awareness. In the next part, we'll explore how this awareness becomes your greatest shield, how consciousness, not armor, is what truly protects you, and how the deepest kind of immunity isn't about defense, but about transformation. Because once you understand yourself, nothing outside of you can truly break you again. From a young age, you were taught that pain was something to run from, that crying meant weakness, that to suffer was to fail, so you learned to hide your tears, to silence your sadness, to numb your discomfort with distraction, achievement, or the illusion of control. But here's what no one told you. The more you flee from pain, the more it takes root in you. And over time, it doesn't disappear, it mutates. It disguises itself as apathy, as anxiety, as rage you can't explain, as exhaustion you can't shake, as a slow erosion of joy. And when left unaddressed, that pain doesn't just haunt you, it begins to run your life. Carl Jung saw suffering not as an enemy, but as a guide. He called it a messenger from the soul, a sacred signal from the unconscious that something within you is calling for change, not to destroy you, but to wake you up. He once said, "Depression is like a woman in black. If she turns up, don't shoo her away. Invite her in, offer her a seat, treat her like a guest and listen to what she wants to say." But we don't listen. We fill our calendars, scroll endlessly through screens, drink, shop, scroll, hustle, anything. To avoid the silence where pain speaks, we do everything to escape that deep inner voice because we fear what it might reveal, the truth about what's been broken, buried, or long denied. But here's the paradox of transformation. What you most want to avoid is exactly where your healing lives. Suffering only hurts this much because you are still at war with yourself. There is a part of you that wants to evolve, to shed the old skin, to grow, and another part that wants to cling to the familiar no matter how painful it is. There's the part of you that knows something has to change, and the part of you terrified of what that change might cost. And between those two parts, a great tension builds. That tension is pain. You feel it when you resist what life is asking of you, when you refuse to let go of the toxic relationship, the outdated identity, the beliefs that once protected you, but now imprison you. You feel it when your soul wants to rise, but your ego holds it down. And so pain becomes the friction between who you are and who you're called to become. That's why it hurts. Not because you're broken, but because you're transforming. Growth, by its very nature, is uncomfortable. Letting go of the familiar always feels like dying. And in many ways, it is. You are grieving not just what happened to you, but who you had to become to survive it. You're mourning the masks you wore, the roles you played, the illusions you clung to. You're burying a self that no longer fits. And that kind of grief is sacred because only when everything falls apart, when your defenses shatter and your old strategies stop working, can you finally meet yourself without pretense. And in that raw, stripped-down space, you discover the most astonishing thing of all. You are still here, still breathing, still capable of love, still worthy, still whole. Not because you have it all together, but because you're no longer pretending you do. That's the sacred gift of suffering. It brings you face to face with your real self. Not the performance, not the survival strategy, but the soul, and that encounter is holy. It's where shame loses its grip, where fear meets truth, where wounds become wisdom. Jung understood this deeply. He didn't see suffering as a failure of the psyche, but as an initiation into deeper life. As a rite of passage, the ego must endure to give birth to something greater, and most people never make it through. They get scared halfway and turn back. They numb themselves, distract themselves, deny the pain, and then wonder why life feels so flat, so hollow, so small. But not you. If you've made it this far, if you're still reading this, It's because something in you is ready. Ready to stop running, ready to turn and face the dark valley, ready to walk through it instead of around it, because somewhere inside, that valley is not the end. It is the beginning. It's the descent into the unconscious, the place where real change begins. It's the place where the false self dies and the true self rises, and that's the journey of individuation. Jung never sugar-coated this path. He described it as lonely, painful, and often misunderstood. He knew it would challenge everything you thought you knew about yourself. He called it a pathless path, because no two journeys are the same, and no map can lead you through your own soul. But he also said this: individuation is the only path that leads to true freedom, not the freedom to avoid pain, but the freedom to no longer be defined by it. Not the freedom to be untouched by life, but the freedom to meet life. Fully awake, fully present, fully whole. The path of individuation is the process of descending into your own ruins and discovering that your ruins are not the end, they are the foundation. It's the moment when the mask falls away and you realize, everything I thought I needed to hide is the very thing that makes me real. And in that space of vulnerability, something new is born. Not a new identity to impress others, but a new presence. A quiet, grounded, unshakable presence that no longer seeks external validation because it has found something deeper. It has found truth. And that truth doesn't need to shout. It doesn't need applause. It doesn't need to win every argument or be liked by everyone. It just is, and that's where the real shift happens. That's where you stop surviving and start living. Not from your wounds, but from your wholeness. Not from your ego, but from your essence. And that's the work we're doing here, Jorge. This is not surface-level motivation. This is soul-level restoration. In the final part, we'll talk about the culmination of this journey, how clarity, not control, becomes your shield. How you stop protecting yourself from life and start participating in it with full awareness. How at last, nothing outside you holds power over your inner peace. We're almost there. You've come a long way. You've walked through the fire of your wounds, faced the monsters you once buried, and stood at the edge of your own inner abyss. And now there's only one truth left to embrace. You don't need more protection. You need more presence. Most people live their entire lives trying to defend themselves from heartbreak, from failure, from the fear of not being enough. They build thick walls of perfectionism. They hide behind success, logic, or emotional numbness. They spend their days trying not to be hurt again, but in doing so, they lock themselves in a cage. A cage with golden bars, perhaps, but a prison nonetheless. Because here's the secret. The more you try to shield yourself from life, the more life passes you by. The only real safety is found not in controlling the world, but in deeply understanding yourself. And that's where consciousness becomes your greatest shield. Carl Jung understood this better than anyone. He said, "What you resist persists. What you accept transforms. The more you resist the truth of who you are, your patterns, your wounds, your fears, the more they run your life from the shadows. But when you turn toward them with curiosity, with compassion, with honesty, they begin to lose their grip. Awareness is not just some spiritual idea. It's the most practical and powerful force you can cultivate. Because the moment you become conscious of your inner world, the outer world loses its power to control you. You still feel pain, but you no longer collapse beneath it. You still face rejection, but you no longer make it mean that you are unworthy. You still experience loss, but you no longer become lost with it. You remain rooted even when the wind howls. Why? Because your sense of self is no longer built on the fragile foundation of external validation. It now rises from within, from a clarity that can't be shaken. This is what it truly means to become untouchable. Not because you don't feel, Not because you've stopped caring, but because you've stopped outsourcing your identity to the world. You've reclaimed it. You've owned it. You've embodied it. You've stopped waiting for others to define your value. You've stopped hoping circumstances will finally make you feel whole. You've chosen to live from the inside out, and that changes everything. Because once you understand the mechanics of your emotional world, your triggers, your coping mechanisms, your projections, you begin to realize that most of your suffering was never about the world itself. It was about the stories you told yourself in response to it. Someone rejects you. It used to mean, I'm not lovable. Now it means, they couldn't see me, but I still do. Someone disappoints you. It used to mean, I can't trust anyone. Now it means, they acted from their level of awareness, and I have the freedom to walk away. Life throws chaos your way. It used to mean, I'm losing control. Now it means, here's an opportunity to meet myself again, more. Honestly this time, that's the power of inner clarity. It doesn't prevent pain. It prevents pain from becoming your identity. And when your identity is no longer built on fear, you become unshakable, because you've stopped resisting life and started participating in it. You're no longer standing on the shore, hoping the waves won't reach you. You've learned to swim in the depth where the waters are calm. Yes, you'll still be challenged. Yes, you'll still grieve. Yes, you'll still have days when the old wounds echo back. But now you have tools. You have language. You have presence. You have space between what happens and how you respond. That space is freedom. That space is power. That space is consciousness in action. And here's the beautiful irony. When you stop trying to protect yourself from life, you actually become far more protected. Not because nothing bad ever happens, but because your inner landscape is no longer shaped by fear. It's shaped by truth, and truth cannot be manipulated. It cannot be broken. It cannot be taken from you. That's the real armor, not the hard, rigid kind that isolates you, but the fluid, living kind that embraces everything without being overwhelmed by it. You still feel deeply, but you don't drown. You still care, but you're not consumed. You still love, but you're not owned. That's what emotional maturity looks like. That's what inner freedom tastes like. That's what Jung meant when he spoke of individuation, not as a destination, but as an ongoing becoming. You are no longer a collection of fragmented reactions. You are no longer a slave to your unconscious. You are no longer a performance trying to earn belonging. You are you, and that is enough. Let this be your awakening, not the kind that shouts from the rooftops, but the kind that whispers in your chest at 2 a.m. I know who I am now. I'm not broken, I'm becoming, and if others don't see it, that's okay. You no longer need to be seen to exist. You see yourself. You no longer need to be validated to feel real. You validate your own experience. You no longer need to be chosen to feel worthy. You've already chosen yourself. That's the ultimate crossing, not away from the world, but deeper into yourself. It's not a retreat from life. It's a return to it, fully conscious, fully engaged, fully alive. And now, Jorge, you've arrived at a place most people never do, not because they can't, but because they won't. But you did. You were willing to face the fire, to look at your wounds not with judgment but with reverence, to let go of who you thought you had to be, and make space for who you really are, and that is sacred. So now what? Now you live, not on autopilot, but on purpose, not as a reaction but as a revelation, and whenever life tries to pull you back into fear or performance or illusion, you remember, awareness is your shield. Wholeness is your power, and presence is your path. Let the world do what it does. You stay rooted. You stay awake. You stay whole, because now nothing outside you holds the power to define your worth, shape your identity, or take away your peace. And that is what it means to be untouchable. See you in the next video. Take care and see you soon.